All right, so 90 students there sleeping in the hallways at the Cape Town University of Technology. Amnesty International South Africa has called for restraint during protest action at Wits in response to reports of violent clashes at university. Shenilla Mohamed is the Executive Director at the organisation, saying that security personnel should only use force as a last resort, and even then, only the bare minimum to prevent injury or loss of life. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by more about the Wits University Johannesburg student protest. We're now joined by Amnesty International's Mienke Steytler. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the programme.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter.
All right, so these protests have been going for a few days now, and I suppose, given the history of these interactions often at this time, it was inevitable maybe that what we saw today was going to happen.
Yes, and that's when we saw it starting to happen. We were quite alarmed because I mean, all of us have seen this happen before, and the injuries that can happen. In 2021, someone was tragically killed as well, and we felt that it was very important to call on everyone involved. So the police, the security forces, and the students to exercise restraint, and to make sure that no one is injured or killed again.
What's your understanding of what's gone wrong here? Because if you listen to the university, they present a certain case. You listen to the students, they present another case, and both seem to have cases to put on the table. How do we interpret what's happening?
It does look like a breakdown in communication. It does look like frustration that has been boiling for a long time and has really come to the fore, and that communication between the university and the protesters, the students, has broken down. So we really hope that both parties can, and as you said, come to the table with their viewpoints, and that a peaceful resolution can be found before we see further violence. And we also, look at domestic and international law. So here in South Africa, the Police Services Act, saying that excessive use of force should be, never used, and that any sort of force, as you yourself said, should just be a last resort. And then internationally, there's also the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which allows people to peacefully protest. But that's why we're calling on the protesters and on the security and the police to really calm things down. And we really hope some mediation can take place. Some better communication, because that's what it looks like. It looks like communication that has broken down and that there's no coming together happening yet.
So I suppose the university has to make a decision on when it's becoming unsafe and who to call for help. At one layer, they have private security, but once the police start to come in with nyalas, the situation escalates. And I wonder what could have been done given what was playing out.
Yes, possibly that people would come out and try and speak to the leaders of the protest, the leader of the Student Representative Council, for example, and also, that we just keep saying that communication is better. We were quite alarmed when we also saw the Nyala, and we know that there were reports of water cannons also being brought in just in case. I suppose this is also because we all know that there's a history of these protests at Wits and at other universities. So the university was probably prepping itself. But at the same time, with this happening over and over and over again, isn't there an argument that once it does quiet down, and it always quiets down, but shouldn't one then sit down and really have a serious thought and serious discussion between student leaders and universities on how to actually go about better resolving these issues? And especially when we start coming to the beginning of the year or to when people are going to write exams, when we know those are flashpoint times, and coming coming together and thinking of more strategically peaceful ways of resolving this before we actually get to what we've been seeing in the last sort of 3 days, and in particular today, how it really ramped up.
How do we compare to other parts of the world when it comes to managing student protests like this?
There are parts of the world that also do not manage protests as well. For example, Peru comes to mind. There have been protests there recently where people have also lost their lives. And Amnesty has been very vocal there and on the ground doing research, interviewing people, and really trying to find better ways of handling this. However, other places you see a better control of protests where people also understand that they do have the right to protest peacefully. They do have the right to assemble peacefully, but that once violence is resorted to, certain of those rights come with responsibilities and fall away. One does see slightly better crowd control, as one can call it, or protest control in your Northern Hemisphere countries, in your European countries, and in the United Kingdom, for example, where one would get people who are upset about something, but there seems to be better mediation, and also as if the police are better trained, the security personnel are better trained in handling situations like this. I think South Africa has a history of where obviously police are also human beings, but that there is training, there can be training put in place to deal with crowds that are angry and frustrated, and maybe rightly so as well. And South Africa has a history of that too, not only in student protests, but in other situations as well that we've seen before that have not had great endings. So Amnesty International would also say that we call on, obviously, the Department of Higher Education to resolve this issue. We call on the universities to communicate and on the students to communicate and to come to the table. But we also say that, security personnel and police should receive training from professionals and from people who are experts in this field on how to better handle protests.
I suppose it starts to become difficult where a student protest starts away from campus in a business district, and rubbish is being overturned, businesses are being forced to close down. So at what point does the university become involved when they can see students coming towards them? And is this then the responsibility of the police to take action at that point? I think this is where it starts to get a bit murky because it started outside campus and then got into campus. Somewhere along the line, somebody had to take responsibility.
And that's, again, where it comes down to training for us, is that if police have been alerted to people gathering, to a possible protest happening, how are there better ways in handling something like this? And how are there better ways in allowing people to express their frustration, and also allowing people to also understand and live out their right to peaceful protest? But at the same time, maybe, holding them back from somewhere like a campus where there could be ignition points, where there could be, people can get more worked up as well. And again, it comes down to training of police and also of possibly some intelligence. So there must have been people that knew that this was boiling, and how can it actually then been handled and talked about prior to it reaching violent protest. Interestingly, also, it falls to organizations like ours and other organizations on the ground to also better equip people with knowledge of what their rights are, and that they understand what peaceful protest looks like, and how they can use peaceful protest to really bring across their point, and that there is no need to resort to breaking things or breaking glass or throwing. I see the images that you're showing as well. Throwing rubbish about, as you said, and maybe also there's a role there to play as well. That it's not only the police and the security that needs training, but also that people need better understanding of what their human rights are and how they can live out those human rights.
Mienke, we're going to have to leave it there, but I think the overall message is communication is key here. both sides
Exactly.
getting to a
Yeah.
point where they talk to each other and listen. Mienke, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Good talking to you again.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Mienke Steytler, who's with Amnesty International, speaking to us about the protests and the ensuing violence that played out today. And yeah, sadly we saw some blood, which means several people injured in that melee.